All right, welcoming back Fern Halper once again for another appearance on Speaking of Data. Today we're going to be discussing the data management in the age of AI, a topic that will be covered in TDWI Orlando in our executive summit by Fern Halper. So if you are intrigued by what you hear today, go over to our website, tdwi.org, check out the agenda, the full agenda for TDWI Orlando. I think you'll be very happy with the offerings that are available to you. But Fern, before we jump into it, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Doing very well. It's a hot one here today, honestly. So I'm a little flush in the face more than I would like to be. I don't have any air conditioning in my house, so one of the upgrades eventually that I'll be adding on to the house
Boy.
here. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. Obviously, AI, generative AI, is a hot topic and will continue to be so for quite some time. So the first question I have, Fern, is why is this topic so important when we talk about data management in the age of AI? And how is data management different for AI than traditional data management?
Yeah, those are all good questions. So if we unpack that a little bit, I mean, basically, like what we see happening in the market is that organizations are really starting to embrace AI technologies, be them, machine learning or, the new sort of generative AI machine learning techniques. And we see organizations, as part of that, they're collecting more diverse data types. That includes things like unstructured data, like text data, which is already mainstream according to our research, things like image data, machine data. And we see this in surveys, and we also see this anecdotally. Like, for example, we're going through now and judging our best practices awards applications. And, there's some really cool things that organizations are doing with unstructured data, and a lot of it revolves around, machine learning and AI, just even the traditional, forms of that, parsing through insurance claims to use that data for machine learning, that sort of thing. And traditionally, organizations have managed, what was their structured data, which is what they did most of their analysis on. They used the data warehouse, and that data warehouse was on premises. And then as they started to increase the volume and variety of the data that they were collecting, for more modern analytics, they started to move to more modern platforms. That's why the cloud became popular, to handle larger amounts of this diverse data. And so they moved to cloud data warehouses and cloud data lakes, and now cloud data lake houses, that combine the functionality of the warehouse and the lake together. Um, and when you think about it, they were using the the data warehouse for structured data. They were using the data lake for unstructured data for more advanced analytics. So now the platforms have, evolved as well to support this data. Um, and the cloud, you need the cloud because you're dealing with huge volumes of diverse data, and you're training these models, and the models are complex. They use complex math. They're iterative. You have to, keep training them. So it gets computationally intensive, and then plus you also have, modern pipelines, because you're ingesting more diverse data, and you're transforming it, and you're cleansing it, and you're orchestrating the pipelines. And, then as you have more pipelines, you have to worry about that they're going to break, so you need more automated solutions to keep track of that. So, I mean, all of this is sort of feeding into, why data management is so important for AI. And, now we have the introduction of generative AI, that's going to also require modern platforms. And everyone's talking about generative AI. And when we talk about generative AI, we say that it's a subset of artificial intelligence. It includes systems that are designed to generate outputs like images and music and text, or other forms of media, based on the training data, and then the key word is in generative AI is generate, so rather than analyzing or processing data, the idea is that it's going to learn from existing data and then create new data that's consistent with the original data set. And so that generative AI is going to require deployment of, data ops infrastructure that's going to be suited to these use cases. Like we're talking about data lakes and data lake houses and unified architectures. Organizations, they're going to have to think about, how they're going to manage their infrastructure, their data infrastructure for managing and training data, to support new algorithms and new models that are going to be associated with generative AI projects. And then someone is going to want to deploy generative AI, to work against the company's data. So, they may take what's called a foundation model, which like ChatGPT that you've heard of, that's a foundation model. And there are a number of foundation models out there, that have been trained on huge corpuses, of data, be that text data or other types of data. And, if you want to use it for your company, then you're going to want to bring it behind, not use it in a public sense, but, probably bring it into your private environment to train it on your data, because you don't want your data as part of, someone else's model. And, so you're going to have to think about what does your data management infrastructure look like, for that. And, certainly generative AI, that involves some of the largest and most, compute intensive machine learning models on the planet. And it's not like you're necessarily going to be training a foundation model, although I bet some organizations will, like build their own foundation models, but most of them are going to, take a pre-trained model, some sort of pre-trained foundation model, bring it into their environment and then train it with their own data, but as I was saying, they're going to have to think about what their architecture is going to look like to do that. I mean, so that's a long-winded way of answering your questions, but it's different. Like, yeah, you're going to call a model. Like if you have a machine learning model, that's running in your environment, yeah, you're going to call the machine learning model. I mean, just like here, you may call the pre-trained foundation model, but there's other things you're going to have to think about in terms of, what that means for governance, sort of also. There's just lots of issues that I think organizations are just starting to wrap their head around. And, frankly, we are too, because we're learning as we go, with this, and we're spending a lot of hours looking at it all, but it's still all relatively new.
Right. Yeah. Just quick follow up there. Have you heard of or seen any organizations that have done what you just mentioned as far as bringing in some other foundational model and starting to use it on their own data internally?
Yeah, interestingly, I think that I've talked to a couple of them. I've talked to vendors who have who have clients who are using it. We're actually getting some case studies of organizations that are doing this at our executive summit in Orlando in November.
Beautiful.
So they'll actually be coming and talking about some of their, what they did. One retail company, I think one a financial services company, I believe, will actually be talking about what they did, how it worked for them. Some of the implementations, may not be all that complex, but it's still somewhat complex, and people can get the idea of what's involved.
Well, that's very cool. And actually, transitions beautifully into my next question. I was going to ask you about the Executive Summit in TDWI Orlando, which is taking place November 6th and 7th. Of course, the entirety of TDWI Orlando is November 5th through 10th. So there's a lot of coursework and classroom work and really interesting thought exercises going on there. So what it sounds like you touched on a couple things that will be covered. What other topics might be covered in this Executive Summit?
Yeah, so the Executive Summit has the same name as this podcast that we're talking about, data management in the age of AI. As you mentioned, it's going to be held on the 6th and the 7th. So that's a Monday and Tuesday of that week in Orlando. And, for those of you who aren't familiar with executive summits, they're basically 2-day conferences. They're geared to directors and above, and, director and above data and analytics professionals. So what we do is, we have a whole agenda. It's not just, me and another research director at TDWI. We have our faculty speakers coming in to provide their expert insights on strategy and approaches. We have, as I mentioned, data and analytics professionals from companies who have been there and done that basically, and they come in and provide case studies of how they solved a business problem and the lessons that they learned. They'll typically share what their architectures look like, what their product, what products they're using. It's not like it's a commercial for a product or anything, but they're just talking about the products that they use, and and basically what they learned. And we leave a lot of time for networking, so attendees can learn from each other. We have vendor sponsors there, so we have panels, panels with the vendors, where we ask questions of them. We have a workshop. The workshop, I believe, this time in Orlando is Doug Laney, who invented the 3 Vs. He's going to be doing a workshop actually on AI and data management for AI. So it's going to be a great agenda. And, so we'll talk about trends that are impacting data management. So Jim Kobielus and I are moderating the event, and we'll talk about trends. We have our faculty talking about what a next generation data strategy looks like and what the architecture looks like to support AI. Obviously, we'll talk about some of the skills needed to support evolving data management strategies, the impacts of generative AI and large language models on data management. Also, obviously, governing modern data and analytics, because that's going to be really important. Also, people are talking about data governance, but they need to be talking about analytics governance. And there's a movement now on responsible AI, so we'll get some of that in there too, because, obviously, even generative AI can produce like unusable, bad output that's biased and offensive and everything else. So there's issues to be discussed there as well. So yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell.
Well, yeah, there's a lot there, and all of it will be quite valuable to those that are able to attend. So let me drill down further, Fern. You touched on a lot of the topics that'll be discussed. What do you think is top of mind for the AI for AI with the TDWI audience these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I'm seeing is, first, that there's been a lot of interest in new platforms, new data platforms, such as unified platforms to support modern analytics like AI. Because organizations are tired of data silos, they're looking to improve their architectures, they want to unify their data. And, typically this is some sort of cloud stack or a data lakehouse or some sort of platform, or they may use some sort of data fabric approach, where their data may still be in silos, but they can stitch it together using some sort of virtualization or semantic layer. And so the data stays where it is, but it appears like one data source to the user, which is obviously very important if you're doing AI, because typically in AI, you want an enriched, even just traditional AI, you want an enriched data set. So for example, if I'm trying to just even, traditionally predict churn, I'm going to want information about the customers, that may be structured data, but, maybe I also want to know what they're saying about my company on social media, that's text data. And so historically, one would be in your data warehouse, one would be in your data lake. Well, not even that, even further back than that, you couldn't even get at the text data. But,
right.
I remember that when I was at AT&T, we wanted to get at like the call center records and actually be able to take that data out of the call center records and marry it together with other data to be able to predict churn. And, the algorithms were being developed to do that. Now they're here, and, and you really want this enriched sort of data set because you don't want to keep going back and forth. It just, adds time, it adds errors. It means less people can actually do analysis, so there's a lot of interest in all of that to support more modern analytics. And then obviously, we're also seeing a lot of interest in generative AI. We've been getting lots of questions in our webinars, because, you're moderating those webinars about implementing generative AI, such as large language models. People are interested in bringing the model to the data, so they're not just giving a public platform like, the OpenAI ChatGPT platform, their company's data, They want to understand different approaches by vendors, in terms of how they're going to support generative AI. They want to know how to govern the implementations, how to use their data to train a model, as we were talking about, that's on premises, even how to package up an application, that then is going to run. Like, what does that look like? Is it in a container? Is it in something else? So a lot of nuts and bolts issues, as well as the broader issues that I was just mentioning, like, hallucinations, when models are generating inaccurate or, bad responses, is the model hallucinating something based on its training data? Yes, but what went wrong here? So they're interested in the black box nature of the models too. So those are some of the questions that we're getting in our webinars. And also, people are interested in what type of applications they can put together using generative AI. I was talking to a guy the other day, who had this idea, which I won't talk about because it's his idea, but, he wanted to run it past me and see what I thought about it. So like, they're really, trying to think of what type of applications can I build that will provide value. And so it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does feel like the next frontier, if you will, in this industry. And it's unfolding, kind of day by day as I can tell. Fern, I have a quick question before I get to my final question for you. Do you envision a world where the let's just as an example, an organization brings in a generative AI or large language model, they start working on it within their own data. Do you envision a world where that, for lack of a better terminology, going to like a car reference here, would there be mechanics for lack of a better terminology for this model, for this large language model, that would be on staff, or some sort of consultant that would come in to help repair something that might be going wrong if it is hallucinating or creating incorrect information when it's generating these responses?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, good question. It seems like there should be, if these things are black boxes, like what's inside of them. And, I was saying the other day that there is some work going on in academia about ways to like get inside the black box to actually be able to explain, what's going on in there. Like, so explainability, like you have for machine learning models. Now, what does that look like for these generative AI models? Or, if it's a commercial product, like, because some of the vendors have their own foundation models, I would imagine that there's going to have to be support people, on the vendor side that will come in and help if there's some sort of problem. I mean, it raises all kinds of questions, in terms of ethics and compliance and everything else, in terms of, who's responsible, like,
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, the company is going to have to, stand behind if you're using it and it's producing bad results. I mean, I guess you can point the finger at, the company that you got the foundation model from, but, you're theoretically training it, and, you should be able, as part of the training, you got to put controls on it and see what it's producing. Some people think that these generative AI models, they're just like magic, that and maybe it seems that way, yeah. But
Right.
like, if you actually want something that's going to be production grade and trustworthy and everything else, you're going to really have to sink your teeth into it and not let it go. Just like, organizations need to monitor machine learning models in general when they're in production to make sure that the data doesn't get stale, that that there's not model drift. This in some ways is even worse than that, or not worse, but it's going to be a lot. There's going to be, like, a person has to be involved
Right.
with this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all evolves in the coming years. So, final question, Fern. What is happening, or is there something happening in the market with AI and generative AI that listeners should be aware of as we leave them with this last question?
Yeah, I mean it's a really fast moving market, Let's and the first I think people should be aware of the fact that there's a lot of vendor activity happening in this space. They're embracing generative AI in a number of ways. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of startups, that I'm sure you've seen them too, right? They've sprung up over the last few years to provide point solutions, that utilize generative AI. I mean, that includes like, Jasper AI and Compose, on the content generator side, and music generators like Boomi, and image generators, and speech generators, and, all sorts of things. So, there's a lot of point solutions out there that may or may not be useful, depend, depending on, what your need is. I've tried to use some of these point solutions, and so far I've been less than impressed. Not the ones that I've named, but other ones that will
Sure.
remain nameless at
Yeah.
this point. But also, infusing generative AI into their products. So, our listeners are going to have a broad range of data and analytics products, and the vendors that they work with are infusing generative AI into their products. So you should be aware of that. Like Databricks recently announced Lakehouse IQ, which enables users to interact with their data using natural language to search and query the data. Snowflake recently announced Document AI, which is a large language-based interface to understand PDF documents. Informatica announced Claire GPT, which is a generative AI data management platform. IBM announced Watson X AI, which can train and validate and tune and deploy generative AI. Tableau announced Tableau GPT to provide an easier way to surface insights and interact with data. Alteryx recently announced Aiden, which infuses generative AI into its analytics platform. I mean, every single vendor probably that you can think of is going to have some sort of generative AI type of product. So be on the lookout for that, and then because many organizations want to run generative AI on their own data, on their own data management platforms, most of the cloud data management vendors have announced, how they're going to support foundation models and generative AI on their platforms. And as I mentioned, some of them have, created their own foundation models, as well. So, those are just some of the things that people should look out for in terms of the vendors. I do think that there's going to be increased regulatory and legal scrutiny of these technologies. We're already seeing that now. And that may slow their adoption, and that's going to increase the overhead burden for enterprises that adopt generative AI. And also we mentioned this, they should keep an eye out for what's happening with responsible AI in this market. So some academicians, as I mentioned, they're writing papers about explainability in generative AI, but it's not just generative AI. There's also advances in regular AI,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Traditional AI.
Like there's new approaches there, yeah. But there's new approaches there too, like causal AI, which identifies the underlying web of causes of a behavior or event, and that's different than some of the supervised models that we've been talking about for years. There's work being done in identifying bias and eliminating it. Organizations, they're still dealing with issues like ML ops, in terms of putting their models into production and versioning them and treating them like software and monitoring them and detecting model drift, even with their machine learning models, they're trying to scale the productionalization of their machine learning models, so it's not just all about generative AI, but certainly generative AI has taken the world by storm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is fun. I mean, that's the, for me at least, the most intriguing part of this is that there's all this new technology that will be created. But right now it's in a very fun stage to kind of look around and see what everyone's trying to accomplish in the different various ways. So it's fun to read every day about some organization or somebody else creating something new and exciting. Well, so I'm going to let you go at this point, Fern, but I do want to remind all of our listeners here, you can hear more from Fern at TDWI Orlando in the Executive Summit, November 6th and 7th. We encourage everyone listening to check out our website, tdwi.org, and click on the events tab and you'll be able to see our conferences there. We do have other conferences. We do 4 of these in-person conferences per year. So if you can't make it to Orlando, you have another chance, 4 more, in fact, the following year. Fern, I do appreciate you stopping by and sharing your insights on this topic. And I look forward to talking to you about this down the road. I know we will. I know there's going to be another couple episodes that we do on this. So thank you again for your time. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, my pleasure.